So hello and welcome to the NFDI talk. My name is Kurt Wilges and I'm working in the NFDI Association's office. In our NFDI talks, which take place every 2 weeks, scientists from different disciplines present exciting topics about research data infrastructure and research data management. All talks are live streamed and saved on our YouTube channel afterwards. After the talk, we invite everybody to ask questions and to discuss topics. This interactive part will not be recorded. In today's talk, Daniel Mietchen will present the Knowledge Graph Infrastructure Base Service, KGI Knowledge Graph Infrastructure for NFDI. Daniel holds a PhD in physics and has worked across spatial and temporal scales of biology, meaning from the atomic scale to living systems and across all timely developments in time. His focus in NFDI is on knowledge graphs, both within the mathematical consortium MaRDI and across disciplines in the Knowledge Graph Infrastructure for NFDI project. He is a frequent contributor to open knowledge initiatives like Wikidata and iNaturalist, and he serves as an editor-in-chief of the open science journal Research, Ideas and Outcomes. Welcome, Daniel. And before we are looking forward to your talk, before this talk, Lukas Weimer will give us an introduction about the base service initiative base for NFDI. Lukas, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Kurt. As always, before the NFDI talks of the basic service teams start, we from the Base for NFDI team will give a short introduction to the Base for NFDI initiative in general. Many of you already know that Base for NFDI is a joint initiative of all 26 NFDI consortia. The NFDI in general aims towards better findability, accessibility, and reusability of research data. And Base for NFDI wants to integrate and establish basic services for fair RDM. These basic services shall be easily usable and for as many consortia as possible. They shall be interoperable, not only with the consortia services and other basic services by using synergies and existing solutions, but also with international standards and services. Base for NFDI provides a framework for these basic services and for development, and helps firstly with the identification of basic service candidates. Secondly, it helps with their step-by-step development within the 3 phases of initialization, integration, and ramp up. And thirdly, it helps during the phases with networking, user requirement engineering, coordination, and beyond. And in this way, the end result should be a harmonized portfolio of interoperable basic services based on consortial consensus. Okay. Now I've been talking about basic services the whole time. How do we define a basic service? We define it as a technical organizational solution that typically includes storage and computing resources, software processes and workflows, and support for service desks, and all those with different levels of technicity. You'll see what I mean by that when we take a look at the list of currently funded basic service candidates. The approach is always to build on existing services and bundle them in order to create added value for all users. Okay, I have spoken briefly about the phases that the basic service candidates go through: initialization, integration, and ramping up for operation. There are various requirements and objectives for each phase. For example, the symbol on the left, this shows the percentage of NFDI consortia that must agree to fund this basic service. Or you can see that the phases require different minimal technical readiness levels. And there are also other criteria, in particular, interoperability for the integration phase and sustainability for the ramp-up phase. Here you can see a list of the basic service candidates currently in funding. They range from very technical services, such as identity and access management, to less technical ones, such as RDM training. If you want to have a deeper look to them, you're warmly invited to visit our website. Today, we take a closer look at one of these basic service candidates, KGI for NFDI, top center here. And at this point, I'll hand over to Daniel Mietchen, who will introduce KGI for NFDI to us in more detail.
Okay, thanks, Lucas. I'm going to share my screen now. I have shared the link to my slides already in the chat. Yeah. Okay. So, as was already said, I'm going to talk about the knowledge graph infrastructure-based service, KGI for NFDI. And yeah, these slides you can find under this DOI. These are my collaborators. Let's go. So the KGI initiative right now is in the initialization phase, nearing its end. Its main aim is to provide infrastructure and services around knowledge graphs. It started in mid-2024 and it is finishing in a few months. It has submitted its proposal for the integration phase, and that is expected to start in the middle of this year. And we have a website and at these links that you can explore for on your own. A little bit of background for those who are not familiar with knowledge graphs. They are basically a database that is based on links between things. So you can imagine there's one concept of interest to you. It is linked to other concepts of interest, and there are different kinds of links that might exist between the entries in your knowledge graph. And some of those links might also go outside of your knowledge graph to another knowledge graph or to some other database, some other resource. They're already widely used across the research ecosystem, including in NFDI consortia. They're built on semantic web technologies. And the KGI initiatives is basically initially taking stock. To make it a bit more concrete, I have an image here. Zoom makes it a bit difficult to navigate. An image here, and to illustrate how a knowledge graph can be formed on that basis, we can basically go through a number of steps here. So this image, it's a photograph of a monument. And the monument depicts Latin and Greek letters. And so already we can link the image to the monument to the letters. And then the letters are part of a mathematical formula. The formula represents some physical concept. The physical concept describes a limit. The limit was overcome by engineering. The engineering got the Nobel Prize in chemistry. And that chemistry is widely used in biology. And all of that has a social context and so on. So for instance, some journalists reused this particular image when they covered the Nobel Prize. And all of these things are ways in which these different concepts, like the monument, the Greek letters, and the chemistry, and so can be interlinked. And so you can imagine that as a knowledge graph. And on that basis, you can build knowledge graphs about essentially any set of data points that share some sort of common links. To the KGI project, we are a number of consortia, or we're based on a number of consortia from the different parts of the NFDI ecosystem. So we have some from the humanities and social sciences, one from engineering, one from the life sciences, and one from the natural sciences. And we're also taking a look at where in the NFDI projects are knowledge graphs already used. This is indicated here with KG or KGs or KG software. right? And yeah, we try to first, take stock of what is already being done. Second, looking at ways to harmonize this. And then also help those who are not using knowledge graphs yet, making informed decisions about whether they should use them or for what purposes or how. Yeah, the partners are listed here. Their partnerships and their involvement in NFDI can also be represented via knowledge graphs. Yeah, you can explore this on your own. In the initialization phase, the KGA project has 4 main work packages. One is to develop a service hub, basically a website that provides information about knowledge graphs, and in particular in the context of the NFDI landscape. In work package 2, we assist individual consortia in finding out whether and how they can engage with knowledge graphs, or whether and how they can make their own knowledge graphs interoperable with knowledge graphs from other parts of the NFDI landscape. In work package 3, we really zoom in on the interoperability. How can things be standardized so that a particular concept that is expressed in multiple knowledge graphs can actually be recognized as such. And in work package 4, we have various community support actions where we look at use cases, case studies, showcases, and that illustrate different facets of the use of knowledge graphs in the NFDI ecosystem. And all of that is being done conscious of the broader ecosystem, so not just the national research data infrastructure, but trying to be aware of what there is internationally, and in particular across disciplines. We are working internally with a number of personas, similar to what a number of NFDI projects are doing. And these personas you can read up. I'm not going to go into detail here. They represent some prototypical users, and they have certain kinds of uses in mind of the knowledge graphs that they know about or that they want to find. And the services, showcases, and so on that we're working with, they're kind of built with these personas in mind. Now, the first persona might have questions. So when I'm looking for existing knowledge graphs in the domain of bioinformatics, I need a centralized registry of knowledge graphs. And I'm frustrated if I don't know what questions to ask in the query interface and how best to formulate it. So the first thing can be addressed by actually having a registry. So that's what we're doing right now. The registry exists, and it has basically some basic knowledge about knowledge graphs that are used within the NFDI ecosystem. And you can ask some basic questions about it. We also are working on documenting the knowledge in the registry hub, which is itself a knowledge graph, such that people who are not familiar with knowledge graphs still have a chance to navigate that. So we have example queries, we have documentation, and we have some background information on what it means to have and use and build a knowledge graph. Yeah, so here's a screenshot of a query that you can already run. It's work in progress, but it's already live. So you would ask a query in a query language called Sparkle. That is a bit, let's say, it needs getting used to if you're not familiar with it. And then it can be instructed to give you the output in a variety of formats, actually. And so what it gives us here is basically a list of knowledge graphs, both their URL, their names, some short description, and, for instance, information about the institutions that are involved in running that particular knowledge graph. And you can ask, in principle, similar questions about these knowledge graphs, and you're trying to enrich this so that you can then find knowledge graphs based on a number of criteria. For now, it's most easiest to find them via the institution that hosts them, or via the NFDI consortia that are involved. Yeah, this comes with a public Sparkle endpoint, so that you can actually use this query language to get information in a standardized fashion that is compatible with what most other knowledge graphs are using. So the use cases that we have in mind is, for instance, you might want to find existing knowledge graphs within NFDI or within your field, or basically in general, just to find out, okay, how do they work, how do they look like, what might they be good for. Or you might also be interested in finding an existing knowledge graph starting from a specific piece of knowledge. So if you know, for instance, that this molecule interacts with that molecule, then you might want to know, okay, which knowledge graphs know something about either of the two. Then on that basis, you can branch out and think about, okay, what else might be connected to that. Once you have found some knowledge graphs, you might want to use them, and you might want to use them alone. Maybe just one knowledge graph is enough for your particular question, or you might want to combine the information that is available through multiple knowledge graphs. And so then this is called a federated query. You can then basically ask one question to one knowledge graph and send the results of that query to another knowledge graph, and you can even repeat that a number of times. And yeah, besides knowledge graphs, you can also combine the entry of the data from a knowledge graph with other resources, including other base services. Other use cases that we have in mind, but they were not in focus of the current initialization phase, that is to deploy your own knowledge graph. So right now we don't do this, but we do provide consultation around this. And in the implementation phase, we would have more assistance with that. And also, right now, we're just cataloging what kinds of knowledge graphs exist in the NFDI ecosystem. And we're also cataloging best practice of interoperability, but we do not implement these best practices in those knowledge graphs. That would be more the focus of the next phase. Yeah, so the next use case would be, hey, I am interested in running my own knowledge graph, and so which knowledge graph technology should I use? I want to have an overview of the existing tools with clear indication of advantages and disadvantages, and I'm frustrated when there is not enough documentation to support less experienced users of these technologies. Yeah, so we're aware of these things. Many of us in the team are also familiar with some technologies and not with others, and so we're also in exchange about what the pros and cons are, how can we compare the different options for tooling, and how can we also showcase their pros and cons in a way that helps users like Lisa to make decisions about what to deploy. And in all of that, we try to document things as much as possible. And yeah, you're invited. If you have concrete use cases in mind, we're happy to assist in making our documentation as useful as possible for these particular use cases. Yeah, here is a snapshot of what the web page looks like right now. You see some technological options and some tutorials and some description about these things. This is going to be continuously developed. And yeah, review is appreciated. So if you are trying to dig into this and you find this useful or not useful, or you would like to have some more coverage of this, then yeah, please get in touch, and we're happy to have a conversation about this. Now, in the long run, things can get quite complicated. Running a knowledge graph can actually be a rather complicated endeavor. And so here I've taken an overview of what is involved. So yeah, Zoom makes it a bit difficult for me to actually see this, but you can start from structured data that is, or semi-structured data. Here, this is from a paper about DNA sequences. And so anything, every time they say DNA sequence, you can basically replace that with whatever data type you're most interested in. But some of those things are then actually generic and cross-disciplinary. So you would try to find this structured or semi-structured data in some databases or some web pages. And you would also go into the literature where you find largely unstructured data. Maybe it's just text, maybe it's in a table or something like this. And then you need some tools to extract this. I'm not going to explain the entire figure here, but there is a lot of, let's say, processing that needs to be done. And these individual steps of the processing, they can be roughly categorized as some steps like this: data acquisition, knowledge extraction, knowledge integration, and graph construction. And yeah, the tools, especially in these two, they are rather domain generic, but they need to be fed by domain knowledge. And then in the end, we also want to visualize this in a way that's relevant to the domain. While we're exploring these kinds of things, there are a few observations. So an important one is that the use cases actually determine key features of the setup. So here, their use case was sequence visualization, and so they built their system around that. And the KGI initiative can assist you throughout this process. And in that case, we would like to point out that for our phase 2, we have foreseen incubator projects. And so you're invited, in case a KGI project continues, you're invited to think about incubator projects that would be either refining existing knowledge graphs in your domain or setting up new ones. But also there are incubator projects in other parts of the NFDI ecosystem. And if you're thinking about doing one of those, maybe think about whether a knowledge graph might be useful in that context. And if so, then we can have a conversation about that as well. Yeah, now we're coming back to the question before. So initially I had introduced this image and the relationships around it under the question like how to construct a knowledge graph, or what are the relationships that might exist. There's a very similar question that occurs once you deal with multiple knowledge graphs. So here, which knowledge graph should hold the individual pieces of knowledge? All of these could, in principle, go into one knowledge graph. But typically, if you are in a knowledge graph about engineering or chemistry, you don't find much information about monuments or Greek and Latin letters and so on. And so at some point, there are going to be cuts, and the individual knowledge graphs, they only hold part of that knowledge. And then the question is, okay, how can we engineer the system, if we're thinking at the level of the NFDI landscape, how can we engineer the system such that the individual knowledge graphs all have their, let's say, disciplinary focus, but still they are able to crosstalk to each other, so that let's say the chemistry graph here is actually connectable to the biology and medicine part or graphs, or to the engineering graphs or the physics graphs, and so on. And that is a challenge. And yeah, here I'm making a little break. So most of what I've discussed so far was about the initialization phase. I had a few, let's say, pointers to the implementation phase. And so during the initialization phase, we learned, for instance, about logistical challenges, coordinating 6 different institutions with multiple knowledge graphs and so on. Also, the base for NFDI processes have changed a little bit over this time period, which has its pros and cons. Then as we're working on the hub, we are getting feedback from the community that they want more resources for technical implementation. And there is interest from multiple parts of the NFDI landscape in using knowledge graphs and in making them work more closely together. And yeah, some want a ready-to-go system, like a one-stop shop where they basically click their system together and then run with it, but it's not as easy as that. Now, a little outlook to the integration phase. Since this is currently just the plan, I'm not going to into too much detail, but the basic idea is we are going to have the entire project built around the hub and registry that we're building now in the initialization phase. Then we have a dedicated work package that is just about interoperability. We will have another work package that is about incubators and deployment. That's where you can come in. You can come with your use cases. We have resources planned for community engagement. And then also a big part is integration and collaboration with other base services. Yeah, and you can compare these things. Basically, we're building some building blocks, especially the hub and the registry in the initialization phase. And then these form the core of the next phase, where we then flesh things out a bit further. And in the process, we're also thinking about, for instance, the European dimension. Okay, you can get involved in multiple ways. So you can share knowledge graph related use cases that should integrate your needs in some way. You can do this in your domains. You can also share what we call visionary queries. I'll give an example of that later on. You can attend our open consulting sessions. You can access the training resources we already provide. And you can explore some other resources that we have here and provide us with feedback. All of this is linked here. Now, just to give you a flavor of the interoperability challenges, I'm going to zoom in a bit on that particular dimension. So in the initialization phase, we had work package 3, which is to come up with an interoperability strategy, and that has a deliverable D3, a strategy for interoperability with other knowledge graph initiatives that, for instance, spells out dimensions of interoperability. We'll see a table of that later on. And in the integration phase, so the plan for phase 2, we have a work package interoperability that has a milestone, a gallery of actionable queries that is accessible. And these queries are what we call right now visionary queries. So how does that look like? So here's that table, the dimensions of interoperability. And so, for instance, knowledge graph generation has the dimension like the graph representation. How do you want to represent the graph? You can use like RDF or a property graph. You can use multiple schemas, vocabularies, ontologies. You can think about different ways to organize the knowledge and terminologies. You can think about different persistent identifier systems. All of that influences the way the knowledge graph is being generated. And then once the knowledge graph exists, you have multiple ways to access it, most notably via APIs. But there might also be direct user interactions via graphical user faces. And these are essentially just technical dimensions. And besides such technical dimensions, there are also legal and organizational dimensions. And especially the combined use of multiple knowledge graphs needs to take these dimensions into account. Now, in the next slides, I'm going to zoom in on just one little aspect of that. So suppose we're going to work on the interoperability of DOIs, which are a concept that already exists in many of the knowledge graphs that are in use in the NFDI ecosystem. And here, I'm also not going to go into detail, just want to give you a flavor of the kinds of things that need to be kept in mind here. So the DOI can, the values can be represented as strings or as URLs or URIs or IRIs. And those strings, they might contain either the full URL with options as outlined here, or only some part, for instance, what is formally called the DOI name. And then that DOI name can be capitalized in certain ways. So where the capitalization is not normalized, for instance, here we have a capital Z, but all the rest is lowercase, or it can be normalized. So the canonical normalization of DOIs is actually uppercase, right? And for the URLs, you have similar ways of doing this. It can come with the defined protocol. It can come without that. It can have this little DX element and again have case normalization, things like it can be linked or not. So there are different ways of doing this. And all of this is essentially just trying to express the concept of a DOI. And now here, for something that has a DOI, we have different ways to express that, that's the link between the thing and the DOI is some sort of a relationship. And that, again, can be expressed in multiple different ways. So there are, first, you can have multiple strings. You can also have concepts like has DOI, or you can have entries in formal vocabularies or ontologies. These all refer to the same concept of DOI. Or in some knowledge graphs, you might have just a number like this. And then, of course, there is the possibility that this exists in other languages. Yeah, and so for these kind of things, we need to coordinate closely with the other base services, particularly around the persistent identifiers and terminology services. Yeah, now I'm coming back to the visionary queries. So basically, these kind of queries are things that are not covered sufficiently by existing workflows, and they are potentially insightful, and they are of the form data type of or data of type A, or think of it like database type A is somehow combined with data from source B, or data of type B, or data from database B, and also combined with some other kind of data, and so on. And that's the kind of thing that normal databases struggle with, because they all have their own individual scope. And knowledge graphs, they can be made to work together in certain ways. And so you can think of such visionary queries. To give you an example, here's one from Wikidata, which was originally posed around 2012. What are the world's largest cities with a woman as a mayor? In order to address questions like this, you need to have a concept of cities, and then you need a list of current instances of that concept. So that is a list of cities around the world. You need to have a concept of a human population and data about the current human population per city. You need to have a concept of a city's mayor and data about who the current mayor is and what their gender is, and so on. And then you need to combine all of this. And that is a question that essentially wasn't answerable until Wikidata made it possible a few years ago. And now you can click on this to get the live queries. And we want to encourage you to think about the queries that you would like to see in your domain that combine data from different sources in a similar fashion. Okay, and with that, I'm ending the monologue part. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel and Lukas, for your presentations. Before we start the question and discussion session, we say goodbye to our